I'm Peter Aves. I'm the Chief Finance and Operations Officer at Poole Re. I'm actually now the longest serving Poole Re employee. I've been at Poole Re 13 years next month. By background, I'm a chartered accountant. Before joining Poole Re, I had a number of roles, none of which were actually in insurance or reinsurance. So I rather fell into the opportunity at Poole Re. And my role here is primarily really that of being a CFO, but one of the things that I like about Poole Re as a relatively small business is that we tend to have quite broad-based roles, and so there are a number of areas of the operations of the business that I'm responsible for in addition to my core finance role. It was really just rather random, to be honest. A recruitment agency, a headhunter, phoned me up and it interested me as a role. I have to be honest, I hadn't heard of Poole Re, and as I mentioned, I haven't worked previously in insurance or reinsurance. But Poole Re is a unique business. We only have one line of business. We reinsure UK commercial property against terrorism damage. We have an odd governance structure. We're an insurance industry mutual, so we don't have shareholders, but we're owned by the insurance companies that pass business to us. And we have a close relationship with government because we have an unlimited line of funding from government in the event that we pay out claims and exhaust our own reserves. And all of this means that Poole Re is rather different from maybe a more run-of-the-mill insurance or reinsurance business. And that interested me when I interviewed for the role, and 13 years later still keeps me interested. The first thing I'd say is Poole Re is, in headcount terms, is probably is the smallest place that I've worked in my career. One of the things that, certainly from a finance perspective, I like about Poole Re is that we deal with what's a systemically important role in the insurance industry of dealing with what could be catastrophically large terrorism claims. But we do that with a small team of people. So currently there are only about 35 employees at Poole Re. But we're dealing with some very large numbers. So our investment fund is around £6.5 billion at the moment. We have premium that is ceded to us by insurance businesses through our reinsurance relationships of close on £300 million a year. So at Poole Re, we are an insurance industry mutual. We're owned by the insurance companies that pass business to us, and we take from insurance companies the terrorism risk that they're uncomfortable keeping on their own balance sheets. As a basic principle of insurance, companies like risks that they can model and understand, and terrorism is a very difficult risk to model. And so because of that, insurance companies are very wary of keeping terrorism risk on their own balance sheets, and the regulators don't want insurance companies to keep terrorism risk on their own balance sheets because of the unpredictable nature of potential claims in the future. And so Poole Re provides this important role for the insurance industry where we take this rather toxic element of commercial property cover relating to terrorism damage, and we then invest the premium that we receive and in a position where we can then pay out claims as and when we have to. And we have a relationship with government that means if we exhaust our own funds, we can draw down as much funding from government as is required. And this means that Poole Re is a strange bridge between the commercial world of insurance and the public world of government. And I think, and more importantly, others believe that Pool Re really represents an exemplar of a public-private partnership. So enabling commercial insurance companies to provide fully comprehensive cover for commercial property and taking the risk that they shouldn't be keeping off their balance sheets and providing them with a guaranteed line of funding in the event that there are claims. The culture is an interesting one. It's to some extent like a small business and to some extent like a large business. We deal with very large sums of money, so we currently have an investment fund of around £6.5 billion. And although our profile is relatively low, people who know about commercial property insurance or have an interest in national resilience will understand about Pool Re's role, and it feels like we punch above our weight as a business. Certainly when you think that there are only 35 people based on one floor of an office in central London. So the culture is hopefully the best of both worlds. We need to be able to demonstrate that we're fit for purpose, so we need a professionalism and a structure and rigor around what we do, which would be similar to what you'd find in a large corporate. But at the same time, we should be agile and quick in terms of decision making, and we should have a culture which is pretty flat in the business. And I think that's what we've got. The office is largely open plan. We obviously have an organisation chart, but it doesn't feel like an organisation where you're constantly aware of what your particular role is in an organisation chart. And it's this ability to work beyond individual roles and beyond individual functions, which I think appeals to a lot of people in Pool Re. Yes, and this is a real step forward for Pool Re. We are, as I've already said, relatively small. When I joined Pool Re 13 years ago, we were probably only about 15 people. That's grown to 35 now. And we're also at a point where, at the moment, we have new challenges that we're addressing as a business. We've always provided this bridge between the private insurance market and government. So we're at an interesting point in the development of Pool Re. Pool Re are an arm's length body of government because we rely on the unlimited funding guarantee that we have from HM Treasury. And we have a framework agreement that was agreed between ourselves and Treasury earlier this year. And what this means is that in certain areas of our business, we're going to have to up our game in terms of how we organise and manage our business and how we structure ourselves. And one particular area is around procurement and PCR regulations. Up until now, Pool Re hasn't applied PCR regulations to our procurement. And when we think about contract management, commercial services, it's very much been left to individual members of the executive team to run relationships between Pool Re and third parties that we contract with. When I think about PCR, on one hand, it fills me with some concern because it takes us into areas that we haven't been subject to up to now, and it's going to be a challenge for us to adopt and become compliant with PCR regulations over a relatively short period of time. And we're working with a consultancy at the moment to make sure that we manage this transition as effectively and as smartly as possible. I think as I've learnt more about procurement and PCR regulations, I've also become increasingly aware that there is some real upside and benefit for Pool Re. Up to now, we've been an organisation that contracts with third parties and runs those relationships largely on an individual by individual basis, with each member of the executive team at Pool Re being responsible for their own third party relationships. This, to be honest, has worked pretty effectively, but it does mean that we probably don't have the rigour and structure around management of contracts. And here I don't just mean the tendering and choosing of third-party suppliers to work with, but the managing of contracts and achieving best results and best value for money out of contracts. And I think the move to us coming into the world of PCR and procurement is a great opportunity for us to build a broader commercial services function that will enable us to more smartly manage third-party relationships. I think it's important from our perspective. We want the best of both worlds. We want to bring people in who have skill sets that we don't have in our business at the moment. We don't understand about, we are learning about PCR, but we don't have first-hand experience of procurement exercises. And I don't believe we have great skill sets in terms of managing relationships with third-party suppliers. So it's important that we bring people in who can hit the ground running and will come with a toolkit based on first-hand experience of running and organising PCR within what could be a very different business to Pool Re. But to be effective, I think, in this role, you both need the technical expertise and background, but also to buy in to the fact that Pool Re has benefits that we have gained from a commercial and maybe even an entrepreneurial approach that we don't want to kill by better and smarter regulation of procurement and contract management. So it's this mixture of technical ability but commerciality alongside that. Our offices are in central London, literally above Monument Tube Station. So very well connected. Outside, looking through the windows of our office, we can see London Bridge, we can see the Monument, you can see across to the Shard. So we have very nice central London offices. And before the pandemic, people were pretty much office-based. Coming out of the pandemic, we have adopted a hybrid working approach, and I think we've done this hopefully in a way that works both for individuals and for the business. This is one area where our relatively small size, I think, plays to our advantage and means that although our general rule is 3 days in the office, 2 days working from home, how that actually is applied within individual functions is something that we don't dictate from the top, but we enable each individual function to work out a pattern of work that works for that particular function and its interaction with other areas of the business. I don't think it's really a case of particular qualifications. I think it is more experience. And from our perspective, we want people who are technically proficient people who ideally have worked in either a range of businesses where procurement rules have applied, or in businesses with a wide range of services. From Paul Rees' perspective, we have one particularly large purchase, which is a retrocession program. Retrocession being effectively reinsurance of reinsurance. But apart from that, our contracts that we will have to consider under PCR rules cover a broad range of activities, everything from IT suppliers through to professional services. There's quite a large piece of our business that relates to investment, the investment function. We have this investment fund that we have built up of £6.5 billion. There are certain exemptions in terms of PCR rules that mean that quite a lot of the investment management will fall outside of PCR rules, but we have custodian relationships, investment consultants, and then in other areas of the business, we have quite a lot of legal services that we buy in, quite a lot of technical and research contracts. So it's an individual who has an understanding of different procurement relationships in businesses that is really going to help us to get this function up and running. If along the way individuals have taken on professional qualifications that are relevant to procurement and contract management, that's something that we would certainly value. But again, I come back to this idea that it is first-hand experience of procurement and contract management that is most important for us. Well, I think, and this is an interesting question, and one that I think about myself quite a lot. As I've already explained, Paul Rees has this strange governance background. We don't have shareholders, we're an insurance industry mutual. We have a close link with government. And without meaning to sound pompous or about this, it does mean that I think people feel that there is a real purpose to what Paul Rees does, and people buy into that. Yes, I'm the CFO of Paul Rees. I want Paul Rees to be operating as smartly from a commercial and financial standpoint as possible. But ultimately, Paul Rees exists to fill a need in the insurance market that the insurance market can't fill itself. And that is first-class insurance against damage to property caused by acts of terrorism. And that's may seem a strange field to work in, and probably is a strange field to work in. But I think at Paul Rees you do sense that we have the ability to shape how that cover is provided, and to do that in a way that we think is in the best interests of the insurance companies that pass business to us, but also their policyholders who are buying the insurance cover, and at the same time to do this in a way that works for government and works for the financial regulators. And I think when you think about the role that Paul Rees provides and the role that we each undertake within Paul Rees' business, it does, I think, mean that there is something that gets you out of bed in the morning feeling that you're doing something worthwhile. And I think that, allied to a culture which I think is a very open, I would describe it as relaxed but professional as a culture, means that this is an interesting and it feels a purpose-driven environment to work in.